I didn't even know my land had been stolen until I saw a waterslide where my wetland used to be. And the worst part is, the guy who built it thought he'd done me a favor. I remember just standing there, boots still muddy from the edge of what used to be my marsh, staring at this bright blue plastic snake twisting across land that had never known anything but reeds and quiet water. And for a second, I honestly wondered if I was the one who got it wrong. But I wasn't. I knew every inch of that land like you know the layout of your childhood home, because I'd spent over a decade walking it, protecting it, listening to it breathe in ways most people don't even realize land can breathe. My name's Daniel Harper, and back in 2012 I bought 96 acres of federally protected wetland just outside a small town in South Carolina called Brigham Hollow. Not because it was profitable, not because I had some grand development plan, but because I needed somewhere quiet after my divorce, somewhere that didn't ask questions, somewhere I could disappear into and rebuild my life without anyone watching. That land, it wasn't just property, it was therapy, it was routine, it was purpose. Every morning I'd walk out with a thermos of coffee, check water levels, document plant growth, sometimes just sit there listening to frogs and birds like they were having conversations I wasn't meant to understand. And over time, I learned which patches flooded first after rain, where the endangered salamanders nested, how the water shifted with the seasons, things you don't notice unless you care enough to look. I had it surveyed twice, once when I bought it, and once again in 2015 when the county updated zoning records. And both times the results were crystal clear. Every inch of that wetland sat inside my boundary lines, protected under federal environmental regulations, meaning nobody could touch it. Not legally anyway. And for years, nobody did. People around town knew me as the swamp guy, which I didn't mind, because it kept developers away and honestly, I preferred frogs over neighbors most days. But that changed the year I took a 6-month consulting job in Australia, helping a conservation group map coastal wetlands. I remember hesitating before I left, standing at the edge of my property thinking maybe I should postpone, maybe I shouldn't leave it unattended that long. But nothing had ever happened before, so I locked up the small cabin, asked my friend Marcus to check in occasionally, and figured everything would be just fine. That was my first mistake. Somewhere during those 6 months, a development company out of Florida bought the land adjacent to mine, a dry tract that bordered the southern edge of my wetland, and apparently they had big plans, the kind of plans that come with glossy brochures and promises of revitalizing the local economy. I didn't know any of that at the time, of course. The first time I heard the name Travis Cole was actually before I even left for Australia. I ran into him one morning while I was collecting water samples near the boundary line. Tall guy, expensive sunglasses, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. He introduced himself like we were already on the same team, said he'd just acquired the neighboring property and was excited about bringing something special to the area. I remember nodding politely, trying to keep the conversation short, but then he looked out over the wetland and let out this little chuckle, like he'd just spotted something mildly amusing. "You ever think about doing something useful with all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the marsh. I frowned a bit, told him it was already doing something useful, filtering water, supporting wildlife, preventing flooding. You know, the usual things people ignore because they don't make money. He shook his head, still smiling. "Man, this is prime land just sitting here. Back in Florida, we'd drain this in a week and turn it into something people actually enjoy." There was something about the way he said it that stuck with me, not aggressive exactly, more like he genuinely believed what he was saying, like the idea of leaving land untouched was a kind of waste. I told him I'd owned it since 2012, that it was protected, that draining it wasn't even an option. He laughed, clapped me lightly on the shoulder like I'd made a joke. "Everything's an option if you've got the right people," he said. And then he walked off, already on his phone, already moving on to whatever came next. I remember watching him go, feeling this small knot in my stomach that I couldn't quite explain at the time. But life moved on. I left for Australia a couple weeks later, and for a while I forgot all about Travis Cole and his ideas about useful land. Australia was good for me, honestly. The work was meaningful, the people were kind, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of something bigger than my own quiet routine. I'd get updates from Marcus every now and then, nothing unusual, just the occasional message saying everything looked fine, maybe a picture of the cabin or the tree line, Nothing that hinted at what was actually happening just beyond the edge of my property. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if things would have been different if I'd asked more questions, if I'd told him exactly what to look for. But hindsight has a way of making everything feel obvious after the fact. By the time my contract ended and I boarded that flight back to South Carolina, I was already planning my first morning home, coffee in hand, boots on, stepping back into that quiet world I'd left behind. I had no idea that world was already gone. And the moment I turned down that dirt road leading to my property, I knew something was wrong before I even saw it, because I could hear it. Music, distant but steady, mixed with the kind of noise you only get from crowds and machinery, and my first thought was that I must have taken a wrong turn, that maybe I was closer to town than I realized. But then the trees opened up, and there it was, bright colors, towering structures, water spraying into the air where there should have been nothing but stillness. For a second, my brain just refused to process it, like it was trying to protect me from something it didn't understand yet, and all I could do was sit there behind the wheel, engine still running, staring at a full-scale water park, sitting right on top of my land. I don't remember turning off the engine, or opening the truck door, or even how long I stood there before I started walking, but I do remember the sound, kids laughing, water slamming into concrete. Music playing like this was some kind of summer paradise, and every step I took felt like I was walking deeper into someone else's reality, not mine. The ground beneath my boots wasn't soft anymore. It didn't give the way wetland soil does. It was hard, sealed, covered in concrete and synthetic turf, and the smell, chlorine, strong enough to burn the back of your throat, cutting straight through what used to be the scent of mud and plant life and still water. I kept walking, almost in a daze, until I reached what I knew used to be the center basin, the deepest part of the marsh where the water would collect after heavy rains, where I'd documented at least 3 protected species over the years, and now there was a wave pool sitting right on top of it, packed with people, artificial waves crashing every few seconds like the place had always been meant for this. I actually laughed for a second, not because anything was funny, but because it felt so unreal that my brain didn't know how else to react. Then I pulled out my phone and called Travis. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful, like we were old friends. "Daniel, hey, man, you back already?" he said, and I could hear music and voices in the background, like he was standing right there in the middle of it all. I didn't bother with small talk. "What did you do?" I asked, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, then he laughed. "Oh, you've seen it. Pretty incredible, right? We just opened last week. Turnout's been insane." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to keep my temper from snapping too fast. "That's my land, Travis," I said quietly. "That entire wetland, it's on my property." Another pause, longer this time, and when he spoke again, the tone had shifted, not apologetic, not even surprised, just dismissive. "Look, Daniel, we had surveyors out here. Everything checked out. That swamp was basically dead space anyway. Now it's something the community can actually use." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "It's federally protected land," I said. "You drained it, you built over it, you're pumping chemicals into what's left, you've destroyed an entire ecosystem." He exhaled like I was being difficult. "Man, you're talking about bugs and frogs like they matter more than families having a good time. You should come see it from my side. This place is bringing in money, jobs, tourism. This town needed it." I opened my eyes and looked out over the water park again, at the crowds, the bright colors, the sheer scale of it, and for a split second I understood exactly how he justified it in his head, but that didn't make it right. "I have the survey," I said. "I have EPA designation. You built this on my property." His voice hardened just a bit. "Then get a lawyer," he said. "Because we're not shutting this down over a technicality." The line went dead after that. I stood there for a while longer, phone still in my hand, feeling that initial shock slowly burn into something sharper, something more focused. Anger, yeah, but not the kind that makes you lash out blindly, the kind that makes you very, very deliberate. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and the first call I made wasn't to Travis again. It was to my attorney, Eleanor Briggs. Now Eleanor, she's not the kind of lawyer you hire if you want things to be quick and quiet. She's the kind you call when you want things done right, thoroughly, and with enough force behind them that nobody questions the outcome. I'd worked with her once before on a minor land dispute. and I trusted her in a way that's hard to explain unless you've seen someone dismantle an argument piece by piece without ever raising their voice. She picked up on the third ring. "Daniel, this better not be another fence line issue," she said, half joking. "I wish it was," I replied. "Someone built a water park on my wetland." There was silence on the other end, then a slow inhale. "I'm going to need you to repeat that," she said. So I did, walking her through everything I was seeing, everything Travis had said, and by the time I finished, her tone had changed completely. "Don't touch anything," she said. "Don't confront them again. I'm pulling your survey files now. Send me photos, videos, everything you can document." The next few hours blurred together, me walking the perimeter, taking pictures, recording video, noting drainage patterns, chemical runoff, anything that could serve as evidence later. By the time the sun started to set, Eleanor had already called me back. "Daniel, it's worse than you think," she said. "I overlaid your survey with the county records and their development permits. That entire structure is sitting squarely inside your property lines. Not partially, completely." I leaned against the side of my truck, feeling a strange mix of validation and disbelief. "So what happens now?" I asked. There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear her organizing her thoughts. "Now we make this very, very expensive for them," she said. Over the next few days, things moved fast. Eleanor filed for federal environmental violations, pulled in the EPA, and sent a formal notice to Travis and his company, giving them 20 days to pay for full wetland restoration and damages, $3.6 million. When she told me the number, I remember letting out a low whistle. "You think they'll pay that?" I asked. She actually laughed. "No," she said, "but that's not the point." Travis's response came through a week later, not from him directly, but from some polished law firm out of Miami, the kind that specializes in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. The letter was insulting, honestly. It downplayed the environmental impact, referred to the wetland as a non-essential waterlogged area, and offered me $80,000 to facilitate the creation of alternative habitats elsewhere. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. $80,000 for 96 acres of protected ecosystem. I forwarded it to Eleanor with a single message: "Not happening." She called me 5 minutes later, and I could hear the edge in her voice. "Good," she said, "because we're not negotiating." What followed was months of legal back and forth, filings, inspections, expert testimonies, the kind of slow, grinding process that tests your patience in ways nothing else does. And the whole time, Travis kept building. That was the part that really got to me. While we were documenting violations and waiting on court dates, he expanded the park, added a lazy river, installed more aggressive chemical treatment systems to keep the water clean, and every upgrade pushed further into what was left of the wetland. I went out there one morning after a heavy rain and saw runoff channels carrying treated water into the remaining marsh areas, and the silence, that's what hit me. No frogs, no birds, nothing. Just stillness. I called Travis again after that. I shouldn't have, but I did. "You're killing everything out here," I told him. "The chemicals, the drainage, you're wiping out species that are federally protected." He didn't even sound concerned. "My legal team says we're in compliance," he replied. And honestly, Daniel, you're the only one still complaining. Everyone else loves this place. That was the moment I realized something important to him. This wasn't about right or wrong. It was about momentum. As long as the park stayed open, as long as it kept making money, he believed he'd already won. And for a while, it felt like he might be right. The case dragged on for months, and there were days I'd sit on my porch, looking out toward the edge of what used to be my land, wondering if I should have just taken the money, walked away, let it go. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I'd remember the way that marsh used to sound at dawn, the way the water moved, the life that existed there without asking anything from anyone, and I knew I couldn't. Not for 80,000, not for any amount. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about someone deciding they could take something because they didn't value it and expecting me to agree. Then, about 8 months after I got back from Australia, Eleanor called me early one morning. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something sharp. "We got a ruling," she said. And just like that, everything shifted. I remember sitting there on the edge of my porch when Eleanor said those words, just staring out toward the tree line like it might somehow react before I did, like the land itself already knew something had changed, And for a second, I didn't even ask what the ruling was. I just let the silence hang there, because after 8 months of waiting, of watching that place get carved up piece by piece, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whether it had all been for nothing. Daniel, she said again, a little firmer this time. We won. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, slow and heavy, like something had finally unclinched inside my chest. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet, because winning on paper doesn't always mean anything changes in the real world. What does that actually mean? I asked. Papers shuffled on her end, and then she read it to me. Not rushed, not dramatic, just clear and precise. The way someone does when they know the weight of what they're saying doesn't need embellishment. The court found Travis and his company in direct violation of federal wetland protection laws, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, stated that the entirety of the water park had been constructed within my legally surveyed property boundaries and authorized immediate enforcement action, including the removal of all unauthorized structures, with costs equivalent to the assessed environmental damages. I closed my eyes for a second, letting it sink in, because what she was really saying, underneath all that legal language, was simple. They had to give it back. Not just pay, not just apologize, give it back. There's one more thing, she added. The order allows you to execute remediation directly if they fail to comply immediately. I opened my eyes. Define immediately. There was a pause, and then I could hear the faintest hint of a smile in her voice. As soon as you're ready. I didn't wait. That afternoon, I made 2 calls. The first was to a demolition contractor named Ray Sullivan, a guy Eleanor had worked with before on environmental restoration projects. Someone who understood that this wasn't just about tearing things down, it was about doing it in a way that didn't cause further damage. The second call was to the EPA contact we'd been coordinating with throughout the case, just to make sure everything we were about to do was documented, supervised, and above board. By the next morning, we were standing at the edge of the park, Ray and his crew unloading equipment, Eleanor beside me with a folder tucked under her arm, calm as ever, like this was just another Tuesday. It was early, before opening hours, but there were already a few staff members moving around inside, checking systems, prepping for the day, completely unaware that the day wasn't going to go the way they expected. You sure about this? Ray asked, glancing over at me as one of his guys fired up a piece of machinery. I looked out over the park one more time. The slides, the pool, the artificial palm trees, all of it sitting where something else used to exist, something quieter, something real. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Eleanor stepped forward then, motioning for one of the staff members to come over. A young guy, maybe early 20s, still half asleep, walked up looking confused. She handed him a copy of the court order, explained the situation in that same steady tone she always used, and I watched as the confusion on his face slowly shifted into something else, disbelief, maybe a little pain. You're shutting us down? He asked. Effective immediately, she replied. Within an hour, the place was cleared. Guests were turned away at the gates, employees sent home, and word started spreading faster than I expected. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered outside the entrance, people asking questions, some angry, some just curious, phones out, recording everything. And then we started. The first structure to come down was part of the outer parking area. Easier, less complicated, a way to begin without immediately diving into the core of the park. The sound of concrete cracking under heavy machinery. It's different when you know why it's happening, when it's not just destruction for the sake of it, but correction, like undoing something that should have never been done in the first place. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel strange, watching something that massive start to fall apart piece by piece. It took less than a day for the main entrance to be reduced to rubble, the signage torn down, the bright colors dulled under dust and debris, and by the second day, we were into the central structures, the restaurants, the locker rooms, the mechanical systems that kept the whole place running. Ray's crew worked with a kind of precision that almost made it look choreographed, tearing down sections in a way that minimized runoff, contained contaminants, and preserved what little of the underlying soil could still be salvaged. Eleanor stayed the entire time, coordinating with inspectors, documenting every step, making sure there was no room for anyone to come back later and question what had been done or how it had been done. And then, sometime in the middle of the third day, while we were working on the main wave pool, Travis showed up. I saw his car pull in before I saw him, sleek, expensive, out of place against the dirt and machinery, and when he stepped out, he just stood there for a second, like his brain hadn't caught up to what his eyes were seeing yet. Then it hit him. He walked fast, almost running, straight toward us, his face already flushed red. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the machines. Ray signaled his crew to pause, and for a moment everything went quiet except for the distant hum of engines idling. I didn't move. I just reached into Eleanor's folder, pulled out a copy of the court order, and held it out to him. "It's over," I said. He didn't take the paper right away. He just stared at me, breathing hard, like he was trying to decide whether to yell, argue, or pretend this wasn't happening. "You can't just," he started, but Eleanor stepped in, calm as ever. "We can," she said. "And we are." He snatched the document from my hand then, scanning it quickly, his expression shifting with every line, anger giving way to something tighter, something more controlled. "This isn't how this works," he said, but there was less conviction in it now. "It is now," I replied. There was a long pause after that, the kind where nobody really knows what comes next, and for a second I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because I remembered that first conversation we had, the way he'd looked out over the wetland and dismissed it like it didn't matter, like its value was measured only by what he could build on top of it. This was the consequence of that thinking. He handed the paper back without another word, turned, and walked away. We didn't stop. By the end of the week, the slides were gone, cut into sections and hauled off, the pools drained and broken apart, the underground systems exposed and dismantled. 8 days after we started, there was nothing left of the water park but cleared ground, piles of sorted debris, and the beginning stages of something else, restoration. The real work, in a lot of ways, started after the demolition. Reintroducing native plants, restoring natural water flow, rebuilding soil integrity. It's slow, meticulous, and nowhere near as satisfying to watch as something being torn down, but it matters more. It's the difference between winning a fight and actually fixing what caused it in the first place. I still go out there every morning, same as I used to, coffee in hand, boots in the mud, and it's not the same, not yet. Some parts may never be exactly what they were before, but every now and then, I'll hear something, a frog, a bird, a small sign that life is finding its way back, and that's enough to keep me going. Now here's the thing I keep coming back to, even after all of this. Travis didn't think he was the villain. In his mind, he was building something better, something people could see, use, profit from. And I get that, I really do. Not everyone looks at a piece of land and sees value in leaving it alone. But where do you draw that line? Between progress and preservation, between what we can build and what we should leave untouched? Because if the law hadn't stepped in, if I'd taken that 80,000 and walked away, that wetland would be gone for good, replaced by something louder, flashier, and a whole lot easier to justify. So I'm curious what you think. Was this justice, or was it overkill? Should something that brings jobs and entertainment outweigh something most people never even notice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect. And if you've ever seen something like this happen in your own town, I'd want to hear that too.